Hello, we're back with the non-dual lectionary, and we're picking up right where we left off last week with the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, year C. And the gospel lesson is Luke chapter 4, verses 21 to 30. And if you recall last week, it was a section that began with the heading, The Rejection of Jesus at Nazareth. We didn't get the rejection yet, but now we're going to pick up from there. So the first verse here, verse 21, is how the previous lesson ended. We'll pick up right from there. So Jesus is in the synagogue. He's read this passage where he identifies some union, and I talked about that with uh, with someone with the Spirit of the Lord upon them, who's going to bring sight to the poor, etc. And then and so we pick up then with verse 21. Then he began to say to them, Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, Is this not Joseph's son? He said to them, Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, Doctor, cure yourself. And you will say, Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum. And he said, Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many with a skin disease in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. So here, I think we kind of have the flip side of what we talked about last week, actually. Last week, what I suggested is um, Jesus was speaking about resonance or identity between himself and the hearer, the true nature of each. That the Spirit of the Lord is on me and it fulfilled in your hearing. Um, Not you as a separate self and not me as a separate self, but as our true nature, our non-dual true nature, that non-dual recognition, whatever you want to call it, whatever word best captures that, knowing that words can't capture it. That the resonance is there, right? And so we pick up with that, and all was speaking well of him and amazed at the gracious words that he says, etc. And then the way I read the rest of this is actually a statement about sort of what's not going to happen, and and kind of at least this is part of the teaching, I think, not so much as a statement about fundamental truth, right? But a teaching about, that true nature doesn't make everything okay for the separate self. I think a lot of us, at least I'll speak for myself, when we get into the spiritual uh, project, we're motivated at first, even if we dress it up by what are really ego or separate self desires, right? The end of suffering for my ego, right? Which I hear is like the end of pain, the end of I'm not going to feel bad anymore, that kind of thing. Over time, one of the things we really learn is that's not possible. That's not even the aim. It's more an identity shift. It's more a recognition of what's always been true than a change of what's been happening. Because if what's already been true has been true all along, then it's been true even in the midst of the pain and the suffering. And so here we have people being amazed, and then he steps in and says, essentially, now hold on here, right? Beware. This doesn't mean that true nature that I am embodying, and that if you can hear, you can embody as well, is going to fix everything. Um, that it gets spoken about the hometown, right? But hometown here can be a metaphor or a mythological way of communicating about our normal sense of self. Um, so there's many widows in the time of Elijah, but Elijah didn't wasn't sent to the widows around here, right? He didn't just save everyone. And again, skin disease at the time of Elisha, and he didn't cleanse all of them. When when that true nature is manifest, there is a fundamental shift. There is a fundamental okayness, but it doesn't make every problem go away, and it isn't a cure-all, and it isn't. I think this is a sharp lesson then to everyone that's hearing, not with the ears of that true nature, but from the normal ears. Like, look out here. There's a if you expect that if you're into this for the shift in for the changes that you want to hear, your separate self wants to hear, you're not going to get what you want. It's a sharp lesson. Um, it resonates with me. Jim Finley has a phrase that he uses often. Um, God protects us from nothing, but unexplainably sustains us in all things. And I think that resonates here as well. You don't have to, in the Christian tradition, we are using the God language, and I know some people don't like that. It doesn't always work for me, but protects us from nothing, right? The sorrows, the pains, the disasters of life are still here, even when manifesting and recognizing your true nature, even when seen from God's eyes. But there's something deeper in our true nature that is sustained through all of that, and just sitting with that phrase can be a huge it has been for me a huge practice in itself, because there's teasing out the different things there. Even the word sustained, we can hear it in our separate self mind as, oh, a kind of protection, protects from nothing but sustains in all things. And what's the response? The response of the separate self when it realizes that it's not going to get what it's want. It doesn't want any of this. It's going to throw him out. It's going to toss him off the cliff. That's not what I wanted. Uh, but our true nature still has its own momentum. It has its own drive. And so he passes through the midst of them. There's something else going on, even in the midst of our separate self going, I don't want any of this. And so I think this is like a beautiful mythological story of really teasing out, especially when you take last week and combine it with this week, then some really, really neat little themes that I think are just endemic of the spiritual path that all of us are on, and that fundamentally are just talking about what is.